Apache woman begged, "It's too hot. Take my dress off." The cowboy didn't expect what came next. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
Arizona Territory, July 1877, midday heat. The sun pressed down like a weight, flattening the land into stillness. It wasn't just hot, it was dangerous. The kind of heat that made horses slow without being told, that sucked the air out of your lungs before you realized you were lightheaded. Brant Calder adjusted the reins in his left hand, wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his other wrist, and scanned the trail ahead. His mare's sides were slick with sweat. Flies buzzed around her ears. Neither of them had spoken a sound in over an hour. Brant had been riding since early morning, starting from the east pasture where the grass had already given up for the season. The wash was dry again. He'd walked its length, checked the shallow dips where water sometimes collected after storms. Nothing but cracked earth and brittle tracks. He wasn't surprised. He didn't expect much out of this land anymore. But man had to check. A man had to keep routine. At 37, Brant had learned not to rely on hope. His boots were scuffed, his hands were rough from fence wire and leather reins, and the lines in his face had deepened in the last few years, though he never stopped to notice. He lived alone on a small plot west of the Butte line. Not much to speak of, just a corral, a dry well, a barn with one wall half-rotted from termites, and a two-room shack that kept out the cold better than it kept in the cool. Brant didn't want visitors. He didn't want company. He wanted quiet, and he had it mostly. But routine still mattered, and that's why he'd ridden out, checking the water, riding the line, staying ahead of the next problem. That's when he saw her. She wasn't moving. She was lying face down beside a half-dead mesquite tree, the only one with enough shadow to break the light. From the saddle, she looked like a bundle of clothes at first. Then his eyes adjusted and he saw the shape of her back, the rise of her hip, the bare leg turned just enough to show the arch of her foot against the dirt. He pulled back the reins, dismounted fast, and approached on foot. She wasn't dead, but she wasn't conscious either. Her arms were limp at her sides. Her dress, made of worn deer hide, clung to her body in dark patches. The fabric had split across the chest, torn at the neckline and side, revealing skin soaked with sweat and streaked with dust. Her breasts were partly exposed, not by intention, just from damage and struggle. She had scratches along her left hip, and her hair stuck to her cheeks and jaw, tangled and stiff. He crouched beside her, not touching yet, just watching her chest, barely rising. He spoke softly, unsure if she could hear him. "Miss, can you move?" Her head twitched slightly. That was the only answer. He opened his canteen, tilted it, and let a few drops fall on her lower lip. It was cracked, dry, peeling at the corners. She didn't respond at first. Then her tongue flicked out like instinct. He offered more, just a small stream. She swallowed twice, then choked, and he pulled it away. "You're burning up," he said under his breath. Her eyes opened just a sliver, brown, glazed. Then came the words, barely above a whisper, broken by heat and confusion. "Take my clothes off, it's so hot." It didn't sound like shame. It didn't sound like seduction. It sounded like someone delirious and failing. Brant's jaw clenched. He looked at the sky. No clouds. He looked at her skin, her chest, the raw redness around her throat. She'd been out here too long. Maybe a day, maybe more. He didn't know. He unfastened his coat and laid it over her chest, not to warm, but to block the sun. Then he set his canteen beside her and moved his hands carefully under her shoulders and knees. Her body was hot. Her skin stuck against his arms. He didn't let his eyes wander. He lifted her like she was a wounded soldier. Back at the horse, he grunted as he pulled her up into the saddle with him. She didn't resist. Her head slumped against his neck. Her breath hit his collar. He adjusted the reins and turned toward the abandoned prospector's shelter 3 miles north. It wasn't much, 4 wooden walls, half a roof, and a busted door. But it had shade and maybe a working barrel if the last rain left anything behind. As he rode, he kept one arm around her, the other on the reins. Her curves shifted with each step of the horse. Her torn dress sagged at the chest, revealing the softness of her breast through the open fabric. He tried not to look, but he felt every part of her against him, and it stirred something he didn't like admitting. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what she'd run from. But she was dying, and he wasn't going to let that happen. When they reached the shelter, he kicked the door open with his boot, stepped inside, and lowered her onto the old cot. It creaked, but held. She didn't wake. He filled the dented basin with water, stripped off his bandana, soaked it, and wiped her face, neck, chest, and arms. He stopped just above the chest, not because he didn't want to go further, but because it wasn't about that. She moaned softly when the cloth hit her throat. Her body shifted, her leg twitching. He opened the shutters slightly to let in air, not light, found a wool blanket in the corner, and folded it beneath her legs. Her breathing changed, slower but more present. He sat on the floor beside the cot, resting his arms on his knees, sweat running down his face, eyes fixed on her. He didn't speak. She didn't stir again, but her hand moved once, just enough to touch the edge of the coat he'd draped over her. That was the only sound in the room for hours. The heat hadn't broken by nightfall. It only changed shape, less direct, but still lingering in the wood, in the rocks, in the dry air pressing against the broken walls of the old shelter. Brant sat with his back to the corner, boots stretched out, rifle propped within arm's reach, every muscle in his body tight from riding, lifting, watching, waiting. The woman on the cot hadn't moved for over an hour, though her breathing had steadied, now shallow but regular. He had counted the seconds between each breath more than once. He didn't know her name. She hadn't said it. She hadn't said anything else after the heat broke her down. The way she'd whispered about her clothes still echoed in his memory. Not because of what she said, but because of how desperate it had sounded, how little strength had been left in it. There was no suggestion in it, only panic. He kept hearing it even now, though he tried not to. He stood finally, slow, not wanting to startle her if she was close to waking. He stepped outside, not far, just beyond the doorway. The stars had started to come out, and the dark horizon spread wide without interruption. He checked the mare, ran a hand along her flank, listened for distant hoofbeats or coyotes. Nothing, just quiet. The same kind of quiet that followed him wherever he went. He brought the saddlebag inside, opened the flap, pulled out jerky biscuits, a half-used tin of beans. He wasn't hungry. He hadn't eaten since morning, but his stomach wasn't asking for anything. His head was full. His hands wouldn't stop remembering the feel of her skin against his arms. Too warm, too limp, her ribs too easy to count. He didn't know how long she'd been out there. Maybe 2 days, maybe longer. She must have been trying to find her people or get away from someone. She wouldn't have come this far alone unless she had no other choice. He knelt beside the cot and studied her face under the dim lantern light. Her cheekbones were sharp, not from beauty but from hunger. Her lips looked dry even now. Her lashes twitched once as if sensing movement. He touched her shoulder lightly, only enough to shift the blanket. "Miss," he said, his voice low, almost reluctant. "Can you wake up?" No response, just her head shifting slightly to the side. He dipped the cloth again in the basin and laid it across her neck. She stirred at that, her brow tightening, her lips parting. "Miss," he repeated, "you're safe. You're not alone." She opened her eyes. Barely. The pupils were sluggish, but they locked on him with slow awareness. Then her expression tightened. Her voice came out cracked and raw. "Where?" He sat back on his heels. "Old shack. I brought you here. You were passed out in the dirt. You don't remember?" She stared at him for a few seconds, then tried to sit up. Her arms gave out. "Don't rush it," he said, steadying her gently by the wrist. "You're heat-struck. You need water. Sleep." She swallowed hard, looked at the canteen, then at him. "Why'd you help me?" He didn't answer right away, because he didn't know the full reason. He hadn't asked himself. He just knew what he saw, someone dying, and he couldn't ride past that, even if it meant risk. She could have been bait. She could have been a trick, but she wasn't. "You were going to die out there," he said. "Didn't seem right to leave you." Her eyes dropped to the coat covering her chest, then back to him. She adjusted it slightly, cleared her throat, her voice hoarse. "You didn't touch me." "No," he said, tone flat. "I covered you up. Got you water. That's all. She stared at him, long enough for him to feel it. Then she nodded slowly, barely a twitch of her chin. He passed her the canteen. She drank with both hands, slow this time. Her body still trembled slightly as she sat against the cot frame. Her dress, still damp from sweat, clung to her skin. He looked away. Name's Brant, he said. Brant called her. I've got land west of the ridge. Came out to check the wash. Found you by the mesquite. She wiped her mouth. Her fingers trembled. Then she whispered Naya. All right. She didn't offer more. He didn't press. She held the canteen in her lap and stared at the wall for a while. Then she turned her eyes back to him. You alone? Yeah. Her expression flickered. She looked down again. Brant shifted his weight and stood, took 2 steps back toward the door. You can rest here tonight. I'll stay close, make sure nothing comes. In the morning, if you're steady enough, I'll take you wherever you need to go. I don't have anywhere, she said quietly. He didn't move. She looked up again. I got separated. My people crossed the pass. I was with 2 others a fight, dust shots fired. I don't know if they made it. Brant rubbed the back of his neck. You saw soldiers? Didn't stop to look. He nodded. Sat down again. You got family? She shook her head slowly. Someone looking for you? No. He let out a breath and leaned forward, forearms on his knees. Then you stay here tonight. Eat something if you can. I'll get you to shelter or town or wherever you decide. She held his eyes a long time. He didn't look away. Then she nodded once more. All right. That was the only word they shared for a while. Later, she accepted a piece of biscuit. She only ate half. Her body still weak, her hands still trembling. Brant set his hat over his knee and leaned back against the wall again, eyes open, listening for anything out there that didn't belong. Naya curled into the cot and pulled the coat tight over her chest. She didn't ask for anything else. But just before sleep took her, her voice drifted again. Quiet, uncertain. You could have left me. Brant didn't answer, because that wasn't a question, and he didn't have the kind of words she wanted anyway. He just stayed. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Naya sat up fully for the first time. Her movements were slow, careful, one hand braced against the cot, the other holding the edge of the coat Brant had given her. Her cheeks were hollow, eyes sunken from dehydration, but the clarity in her stare was sharp now. She scanned the room, walls warped from heat, one corner stuffed with old gear, and Brant, asleep against the doorway with his rifle leaned across his chest, hat pulled down low. She didn't try to wake him. She swung her legs over the side of the cot and planted her feet on the wooden floor. The boards were gritty with dust. Her ankle wobbled slightly under her weight, but she steadied herself with a palm on the wall. Her dress, though still damp in spots, had dried enough to cling. She adjusted the neckline carefully, pulling it closed over her chest as best she could, and tied the fringed leather cord to hold it in place. The side tear she couldn't fix, so she let it hang, more concerned with standing upright. She moved toward the basin and dipped her hands in the remaining water. It was warm now, not from fire but from time. She splashed her face anyway, then turned her head toward the door. Brant hadn't moved. She watched him in silence. He hadn't tied her down, hadn't barred the door. She could have walked out before he woke, taken the horse, disappeared into the ravine trails. But she didn't. Instead, she walked slowly toward the saddlebag by the wall, found the tin of beans he hadn't touched, and placed it near the fire pit. Then she gathered kindling from the corner and struck flint. Her fingers shook on the first try, then caught on the second. Flame rose. She worked silently, pausing only when her vision blurred. Hunger pressed into her ribs, but the movement kept her steady. By the time Brant stirred, the fire was going and the tin hissed quietly in the heat. He sat up slowly, adjusted the brim of his hat, blinked once toward the fire, then toward her. You're up, he said, voice rough. She didn't answer at first, then nodded. Didn't want to wake you. You didn't. He stood and stretched his arms slowly, joints cracking. His shirt was still off, folded near his pack. His torso bore several old scars, some thin, others deep and angled. Bullet, blade, maybe worse. He noticed her glance, didn't flinch, didn't explain. She looked back at the fire. You eat yet? He asked. No. He reached for the second tin and tossed it beside the one she'd opened. She didn't protest. They sat across from each other on the floor, both barefoot, both quiet. When the tins were warm enough, he peeled them open and handed her one. She ate slowly, chewing every bite, glancing up between mouthfuls but never speaking first. After several minutes, Brant broke the silence. You said you got separated near the pass. What were you doing that far south? She lowered the tin. We were moving camp. Scouts said soldiers were circling the canyon. We split up. He nodded once. That's Union patrol land. Probably cavalry still playing soldier. Nia didn't comment. Instead, she asked, You were Army? Scout. Before. He didn't elaborate. He wiped his hands with a cloth and stood. There's a water hole 2 miles east. Shallow, but enough to wash. I'll take you there if you're steady. She looked toward the door, uncertain. He paused. Where you can rest here. I'm not pushing you. I want to go. He stepped outside to ready the horse. Nia stood slowly, adjusting the torn hem of her dress, then reached for her moccasins, which she hadn't worn since collapsing. They were dusty but intact. She slipped them on and tied the rawhide strings with effort. Brant returned and held the reins loosely. You ride or walk? Walk, she said, at least till my legs stopped shaking. He didn't argue. They moved at a slow pace across dry ground. The landscape was scrub and cracked soil, an occasional cactus or rabbit brush dotting the way. Brant walked a half step ahead, not in front to lead, but not beside her either. Her breathing grew steadier as the minutes passed, and when she stumbled slightly on a loose rock, he extended a hand to her waist, held just long enough for her to find her footing. She didn't thank him. He didn't ask for it. When they reached the water hole, it wasn't much, just a shallow pool in the crook of 2 stone ledges, but it was enough. Nia knelt beside it, dipped both hands in, and brought the water to her face. She scrubbed the dirt from her arms, then turned away slightly, loosening the shoulder of her dress to rinse beneath. Brant didn't watch. He found a rock nearby and sat with his back turned, cleaning his boots with a twig, listening to the sound of water dripping from her fingers. She spoke first. You could have looked. I didn't need to, he said. That ended the conversation. She returned to him with damp hair, skin cooling under the sun. Her expression softer now, her shoulders less tight. Do you think they're still looking? She asked. He tilted his head. If they saw you get away, maybe. If they think you're dead, maybe not. I stayed alive. You did, he agreed. She sat on a flat stone nearby. You think I'm a burden? He turned toward her slowly. If I did, I'd have left you where I found you. She didn't respond. They sat in silence as the wind picked up slightly, just enough to stir the air. A bird circled high overhead. Brant scanned the ridge out of habit. Nia watched him carefully, noticing the way his jaw tensed when his gaze swept west. You always alone? She asked. Yeah. Why? He didn't look at her when he answered. Quieter that way. She didn't push. By midday, they started walking back. Her steps were firmer now. She stayed closer, not from fear, but from some need she hadn't yet named. And when they reached the shack again, she didn't ask where he'd sleep. She just sat near the door and waited as he checked the horizon, laid wood near the fire pit, and filled the basin again. That night, she didn't ask why he stayed. She just handed him back his coat and said quietly, Thank you for not touching me. And this time, he answered, I wasn't raised that way. Then he sat beside her, not close, but not far. And both of them knew, for the first time in a long while, neither one would sleep alone. The next morning came without warning. There was no rooster, no wind, no shift in air. Just light breaking between the crooked wood slats of the shelter, drawing a thin line across the floor until it climbed up Brant's leg. He opened his eyes and sat up slow, spine stiff from sleeping against the wall. His rifle was still in reach. Nia wasn't on the cot anymore. He stood without speaking and scanned the room. The door was open. He stepped out, expecting distance, but she wasn't far. She was sitting on a low stone near the edge of the clearing, facing away from the shack, her back straight, one leg drawn up to her chest. Her dress had dried fully now, though it still bore the tears from the heat and the desert. She had tried to rebind the sides with a leather cord pulled from one of her moccasins, enough to keep her covered without hiding the damage. She didn't turn when she heard him behind her. I heard crows earlier, she said. circling close. He followed her gaze across the dirt basin. Could be a carcass or something else. Or someone, she added. Brant didn't argue. He stood beside her now, hands on his hips, scanning the horizon. We'll ride out soon. The shelter won't hold up if anyone tracks this way. I can ride, she said. I'm not weak anymore. I didn't say you were. She finally looked at him, face half lit by the angled sun. You think they're soldiers? If they are, they'll be sloppy. They never look far off the trail. And if they're not, then we'll see what they want before they get too close. She seemed to accept that. Still, her shoulders didn't ease. Brant studied her a moment longer, then turned back inside and began gathering supplies. She followed without being told, and together they packed what little they had. No words passed between them. Each moved around the other without colliding. Naya rolling the blanket, Brant tying the tins, both of them folding things that barely took up space. He didn't ask where she wanted to go. She didn't ask where he planned to take her. They mounted the mare, Brant in front, Naya seated behind with her arms loosely around his waist. Her touch wasn't hesitant now. It was practical, steadying herself for the ride. They didn't speak as they moved across the wide land. Only the steady sound of hooves against dry soil and the occasional flap of a crow's wings in the air above. By midday, they reached the base of a canyon, narrow, red-walled, the kind used by ranchers and runaways alike. Brant stopped the horse and dismounted. Naya slid down without help. We'll rest here, he said. Let the sun move off that pass before we ride again. She nodded and walked toward the shade under a split boulder, sat down, and took off her moccasins to rub the arches of her feet. Brant let the mare graze, then unhooked his canteen and brought it over to her. She took it, drank, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. What happens if they find me? She asked. You mean if the patrol catches up? No, the ones I ran from before. Brant's eyes narrowed. You didn't say you were being chased. I wasn't sure if it mattered. He crouched near her. It matters now. She set the canteen down. They weren't soldiers. They were hired trackers. 2 white men, 1 mixed. They were looking for women left behind after the camp scattered. Probably figured they'd be worth something to someone. Brant didn't ask the obvious. He didn't need her to say what kind of worth they meant. They catch you? He asked. They tried. I got away. One of them didn't like that. He pulled my dress and I tore free. That's where the shoulder ripped. Brant's hands were still, his mouth set into a hard line. You didn't see where they went? No. You think they're still looking? I think they didn't find anyone else. So maybe. He looked up toward the ridgeline. If they're smart, they'll head north. Towns pay more for younger women. She didn't react, not outwardly, but her fingers curled into fists at her knees. Brant stood. We'll cut across the creek. No tracks there. She looked up. You're not taking me back to your land? Not yet. Not while someone might be following. You trust me? I didn't tie her hands last night. She pushed herself up slowly, standing close. That's not what I asked. Brant met her eyes directly. I don't think you're lying. That's enough for now. They packed again and moved on. The creek was dry and jagged, good for hiding movement. The sun had begun to ease westward, painting shadows along the walls of the canyon. They didn't speak for miles. The silence between them wasn't heavy, it was steady, shared. And when Naya rested her chin briefly against Brant's back during the ride, he didn't shift. He didn't say anything. He just kept going. That night, they made camp in a small ravine where the rocks gave natural cover. Brant started the fire. Naya gathered brush. They ate from a tin again, this time side by side. When the stars came out, Naya lay on the blanket and stared up. I never saw this many stars from a canyon, she said. Sky's always this full. Just need to be far enough from anything that spoils it. You've been far from things a long time, haven't you? He didn't respond. I don't want to be owned, she added. No one owns you. You think I'm safe with you? I think you're safer than you were yesterday. That was the last thing said before they settled in. Brant didn't sleep near her, but not far either. And Naya didn't keep her knife under her head this time. They woke before the light returned. The embers from the fire still pulsed faint orange under the ash, enough to cast shadows on the canyon walls. Naya shifted under the wool blanket, rubbing her fingers together to warm them. Her body ached in unfamiliar places, muscles unused to travel, ribs still tight from dehydration, but she moved without complaint. Brant was already up, crouched near the edge of the ravine, one knee down, watching the ridge through the last folds of night. He didn't say anything when she approached. She crouched beside him, glancing toward the slope. Anything? He shook his head once. Quiet, but too quiet. I don't like it. She studied him now that she could see him clearly. His face was lined not just from sun, but from years of watching his back. He wasn't a young man, not fresh like the boys sent to chase glory. His jaw was square, dust settled along the edge of his cheekbone, and the small scar beneath his right eye looked old enough to have a story he hadn't shared yet. He wore his stillness like armor, but she could tell by the way his shoulders stayed tensed he wasn't relaxed. He hadn't been relaxed since she met him. "We can't keep riding like this," she said. "They'll catch us in the open if they know the land." "I'm not worried about them catching me," Brant said quietly. She turned her head. "You worried about me slowing you down?" He looked at her directly. "I'm worried about what happens if I stop moving." Naya took that in. "We need a plan. There's a cabin about 10 miles east. Old mining post. Has a locked cellar and a water catchment tank. Nobody's used it since the gold dried up. You know for sure it's empty?" "I know the last man who stayed there died 6 years ago. I helped bury him." She stood. "Then we go there." Brant packed the rest of their gear in silence. They moved fast, skipping breakfast, saving what food they had left. The mare was tired but obedient. Naya offered to walk to give the animal a break, and Brant didn't stop her. She walked in front this time, her pace steady, her steps direct. Her torn dress was retied tighter now, the makeshift cords keeping the loose fabric close to her body. Her back was exposed in places, but she didn't flinch from it. Her posture held dignity even in damage. By noon, the heat came down heavy again. Brant insisted they stop under a rocky outcrop, and Naya didn't argue. She drank from the canteen, her eyes darting occasionally toward the open land behind them. "They could be watching from high ground," she said. "They could," Brant agreed. "But they wouldn't fire from up there. Not if they want you alive." She didn't respond. She just pulled her legs up beneath her and sat on the ground, resting her arms on her knees. Her expression was unreadable. Brant watched her for a long moment, then sat down beside her. "You said you don't want to be owned," he said. "That they took women before." She didn't look at him. "They don't care who they take, just what they can trade. Some towns pay in coin, others pay in favors. What about your people? They don't know I'm alive." "You sure about that?" "If they did, they would have come back for me." Brant didn't press further. She wasn't giving him the whole truth, but she was giving enough. He understood what silence meant. He'd used it himself for years. As they sat, a hawk circled above them, then passed without calling. Brant stood first. "We move again. I want to reach the cabin by nightfall." The final stretch took them across rocky hills and thin crevices between dry brush. The landscape grew more severe the farther they traveled. Less green, more stone, the kind of terrain that chewed up hooves and broke wagons. But also meant fewer people, fewer problems. Just before sunset, they crested a low ridge, and the roof of the cabin came into view. It was small, mostly timber, the front porch collapsed, but the stone chimney still stood. Brant signaled for silence and walked the perimeter. Naya waited, hand at her side where she kept her small blade tucked into her boot. She watched the shadows for movement, her breathing steady. He returned after 10 minutes. "It's empty. Nothing's been touched in a long time." They led the mare into the broken corral and removed the tack. Naya filled the water basin from the catchment tank. Brant checked the door, the windows, and the lock on the cellar. Everything held. He pried open the floorboards in the back room and revealed a narrow staircase leading into a dugout space lined with old mining crates. There were no supplies left, but it was cool and defensible. They didn't speak much that night. Both of them knew this might be the last time they had a wall between them and whatever came next. After eating the last of the biscuits and a strip of dried meat, Naya stepped outside, sat on the porch beam, and looked out at the darkened land. Brant joined her after a few minutes, sitting beside her with his hat in his lap. She spoke first. "You keep watching me like you expect me to run. I'm watching to make sure you don't vanish." "Why would I?" "Because people who've been hurt don't always stay put." She looked down. You don't know what they did. No, he said, but I know what kind of men they are. She turned to him. I was tied, not for trade, for punishment. They said I was too proud, too difficult, too much trouble to break. So they left me tied in the sun. Brant didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "You're still here." Barely. He looked at her fully now, saw the way her jaw tightened when she spoke, how her hand stayed clenched even when she tried to appear calm. "I don't want your pity," she added. "You don't have it," he said. "You have my respect." She blinked. That quieted her in a way nothing else had. He stood slowly and extended his hand. "You'll sleep inside tonight. I'll keep watch from the roof." She looked up at him, then took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. She didn't let go right away. Her grip lingered. Not romantic, not needy, just sure. Inside, she laid the blanket down on the floor near the fireplace. Brant climbed onto the roof, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the black horizon. And below him, Naya lay in the dark and whispered something only she could hear. It wasn't a prayer. It was a vow. She wasn't going to be taken again. And if anyone came for her this time, they'd have to go through both of them. The cellar stayed dark even when the sun came up. Brant had rigged a piece of old tarp over the narrow floor, hatched to keep light from giving away their position. He sat on a crate near the stairs with his rifle across his knees, one boot braced against the wall, eyes never quite closing. Naya lay on the blanket near the rear wall, turned away from him, the slow rhythm of her breath the only sound in the enclosed space besides the occasional groan of wind against the roof above. When she finally stirred, she sat up without speaking. Her hair was tangled from sleep, her shoulder bare where the blanket had slipped down. She didn't pull it up right away, didn't look at him for several moments. Then she spoke. "Did you sleep at all?" "Didn't need to." "That mean no." He gave a slight nod. "Didn't want to risk anything." She stood, wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, and walked barefoot across the dirt floor. "You always this careful with people you save?" "No, but you're not most people." She stopped mid-step. "What does that mean?" He stood slowly, brushing dust from his hands. "It means most people don't get left to die and survive anyway. You have a reason to be alive. That makes you dangerous to someone." She absorbed that in silence, then added, "Or lucky." Brant didn't reply. He moved past her and climbed the cellar steps, opening the hatch just wide enough to check the light. The morning was gray. Cloud cover stretched thin across the hills. Less glare, more wind. It would make tracking harder for anyone following them, but not impossible. When he came back down, Naya had changed positions. She was now crouched beside one of the old storage barrels, sorting through a pile of rusted nails and leather scraps someone had left behind years ago. "I could fix the tear in my dress," she said, holding up a piece of strap. "If I had a needle." Brant checked the contents of his saddlebag and tossed her a small roll of wax cloth. Inside was a sewing needle, dull but usable, and a few lengths of thick thread. She didn't thank him. "Just gotta work." He watched her hands as she mended the edge of the ripped side, fingers moving slow but deliberate, her brow furrowed in concentration. The thread pulled through hide with effort, and she had to bite her lip to keep the tension steady. "You learned that young?" he asked. "Didn't have a choice." He sat back down across from her. "Tell me something." "What?" "You said the trackers wanted women. You ever see them before they caught you?" She paused her stitching. "Once. 2 of them passed near our camp about a week before. They wore hats too clean, guns too new. Not from the territory. East, probably. They watched, but didn't approach. Next time I saw them, they were on horseback, chasing 2 girls younger than me. What happened to them?" Her hands trembled for a second. "I don't know." Brant's jaw tightened. He stood again, walked to the steps, and leaned against the wall. "They'll keep looking if they think you're still alive." "I want them to look," she said. "I want them close, so I know when to cut their throats." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. That scared Brant more than anger would have. He turned toward her. "That day I found you, you could barely breathe. You said to take your clothes off. You don't even remember that, do you?" She kept stitching. "No, you were gone from yourself. Heat stroke. You could have died in my arms and never even known who I was. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand, whatever you think you are now, you came back from something most don't. And that changes what comes next." She met his eyes then. You think I'm broken? I think you're carrying something heavy. I think I am too. The silence that followed wasn't bitter. It was full. A kind of understanding settled there, quiet, unfinished, but real. That afternoon, they moved upstairs for the first time since taking shelter. The light had shifted. The wind carried dust from the south, but no tracks marked the earth near the cabin. Brant circled the property twice, rifle ready, but found no sign of riders, no scent of campfire, no fresh manure. They might have outpaced whoever was chasing. He returned to the cabin to find Naya sweeping out the back corner with a broom made of tied branches. She had moved the blanket near the hearth and rearranged their gear with a kind of quiet determination that told him she hadn't just survived, she decided to stay. That evening, Brant built a small fire inside the hearth. They cooked what little meat remained. Naya prepared it with crushed dry sage she'd found in a pouch tucked deep in her dress seam. It gave the food flavor that surprised them both. After they ate, Naya stood and walked to the far window. She rested her hand on the sill, looking out toward the black ridge. Why don't you live with anyone? She asked. I did once. What happened? Died. Wrong place. Wrong time. Wife. He nodded once. No children. He shook his head. Never made it that far. She turned to him. You think you can ever start again? I stopped thinking about that a while back. Maybe you should start again. Brant didn't answer. He stood and walked to the table, his boots quiet on the wood. When he reached her, he didn't touch her. He just stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, facing the dark with her. You cold? He asked. No. He looked down. Her hair caught the firelight from behind. Her face had changed, less guarded, more real. He raised a hand slowly, brushed a bit of ash from her cheek. She didn't flinch. She reached up and placed her hand gently over his, guiding it to the side of her face, holding it there for a moment too long to be accidental. I don't need saving, she said. I'm not trying to save you, he replied. I'm still figuring out how to save myself. When she leaned in, he didn't move. Their lips touched just once, tentative, soft, not rushed. Her hand rested against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath. When they pulled back, neither of them spoke. There was nothing to explain. They weren't in love. Not yet. But they had chosen not to be alone. And in that cabin, with danger still out there and nothing promised, that choice was the most solid thing either of them had touched in a long time. The fire had gone low overnight. Just a bed of coals remained, pulsing faint red against the ash. Brant stirred first, careful not to make noise. He stood and stretched near the window, jaw set, eyes scanning the morning haze for anything out of place. The landscape beyond the cabin lay still. No riders, no prints, no movement. But the stillness didn't calm him. It made him more alert. Behind him, the blanket rustled. Naya shifted under it, the sound of her breath slow and steady. He didn't look over right away, but he listened. She moved deliberately, not groggy, not disoriented. She was more alert now than at any point since he found her, and he noticed it. When she finally sat up, the blanket slid to her waist. Her dress was back in place, freshly mended, the lines of her curves visible beneath the soft leather where the fabric clung to her skin. Her feet brushed the floor silently. She didn't speak. Brant poured the last of the water into the basin and set it beside the hearth. We'll need more before noon. Tanks low. She stood and crossed the floor barefoot. I'll go. He shook his head. I'll take the rifle. You carry the canteens. They walked together down the rocky path toward the catchment tank behind the cabin, the wind stirring light dust through the air. The terrain remained dry, but not lifeless. Birds called from the brush. A lizard skittered across the rocks near Naya's feet. She kept walking. Last night, she said quietly, not looking at him. You didn't regret it? He glanced sideways. No, even though it complicates things, things were already complicated. That didn't change anything. She nodded, satisfied with the answer, but didn't push further. When they reached the tank, she filled both canteens while Brant watched the ridge. She passed him one when it was full, and they stood in the silence that had become familiar, comfortable, not distant. On the way back, Naya paused. What is it? Brant asked. Tracks. Not fresh, but not old either. Brant crouched beside her. Hoof prints, light but distinct. At least 3 horses, maybe 4. Heading northwest, parallel to the old cattle trail. They're searching, he said. They're close. Brant straightened. We stay hidden today. If they pass, we wait 2 days. If they stop, we deal with it. You mean fight? If we have to. She didn't ask what deal with it meant. She already knew. Back at the cabin, Brant secured the windows with canvas strips from the cellar and covered the chimney hole to keep the fire smoke low. Naya gathered their supplies, moving methodically, quiet, deliberate, like someone preparing for a siege. Her confidence wasn't false. She moved like someone who had already faced death and decided it wouldn't claim her quietly. That afternoon, Brant showed her the hidden cellar entrance again and how to close the latch from below. He placed one of the rifles down there, along with food, water, and a knife. If something happens and I'm not back in time, he said, you go down there and don't come out unless it's me calling. I'm not hiding if they come. I'm not asking you to run. I'm telling you how to survive. She studied his face. You still don't understand. I'd rather die standing up than be taken again. Brant didn't respond. He simply nodded once and went back to checking the perimeter. That evening, the wind picked up harder. Dust moved low across the ridge like a creeping fog. Naya stayed inside, watching through the crack in the shutter. Brant climbed to the roof and used a set of binoculars he kept wrapped in oilcloth inside his pack. He scanned the horizon for nearly an hour. At twilight, he saw movement. For riders slow, spaced out wide, moving like trackers. Not locals, not cowhands. One of them dismounted often, checking the ground with his hands. Another rode with a rifle laid across his saddle horn, not cradled, ready. Brant climbed down without a word, re-entered the cabin, and began loading ammunition. Naya stood. They're here. Not yet, but they will be. By morning. Then we don't sleep tonight. He handed her the second rifle. You remember how to use one? She checked the chamber, nodded. I won't miss. Brant laid out the plan in clear, sharp steps. If they came through the front, she'd hold from the west window. If they circled to flank, he'd take the side approach and lead them across the creek. If either of them went down, the other ran. But Naya shook her head. If you go down, I don't run. You don't get to make that choice, he said. Neither do you, she replied. You already chose when you carried me out of the dirt. He didn't argue. They sat together near the fire until the coals turned deep red again. Neither spoke much. There was nothing left to ask, and no comfort in repeating anything already said. At first light, they heard the sound, hooves crunching over loose gravel. Not fast, measured, confident. Brant stood first and looked through the narrow crack between planks. He saw 2 riders holding rifles and a third on foot, scanning the dirt like a wolf with a scent trail. The fourth man, likely the one in charge, stayed farther back, his posture too relaxed for someone innocent. They found us, Brant said. Naya adjusted her grip on the rifle. Let them come. They will. He stepped outside first, rifle low, not raised. He walked forward 10 paces, boots pressing into the dry earth, his hat low, shoulders squared. The lead rider raised a hand. You got something don't belong to you, the man called out. Brant didn't flinch. That's not how I see it. She's tribal. She's marked property. Brant shifted his weight. That woman's not property. Not anymore. And if you try to take her, you won't make it off this ridge. The rider chuckled. You sure you want to die over some redskin trash? Brant didn't answer. Behind him, the door creaked open. Naya stepped out, rifle in hand, hair pulled back, dress tight at the waist, torn but proud. Her chin raised. She walked to stand beside him. You want me? She called out. Come take me. None of the men moved. Brant cocked his rifle. This is your last chance to turn around. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the man on foot made a twitch toward his hip. Brant fired first. The shot dropped the tracker instantly. Everything exploded into motion. Naya dropped to one knee, fired twice, one bullet striking the second rider through the shoulder, the other missing by inches. Brant fired again, hitting the man on the left in the thigh. The last rider turned his horse and bolted back over the ridge. It was over in less than 30 seconds. Brant lowered his rifle, chest heaving. Naya stood slowly, her hands still steady, her face calm. They approached the downed men. Two were dead. One bled out before Brant reached him. The one with the shoulder wound still breathed, but was unconscious. Brant didn't speak as he dragged the bodies away from the cabin and buried them behind the ridge. When he returned, Naya stood at the door, her face unreadable. He walked past her and set the rifle down. She followed him inside and shut the door behind them. No words passed, but when she stepped closer, placed her hand flat against his chest, he didn't move. He let her feel the rhythm of his heart. And when she leaned in, their foreheads touched, not for passion, but for something stronger. They had survived, together, and they knew now neither one was going to leave. The morning after the shootout came with a silence heavier than any they'd felt before. Not the silence of dread or waiting, but the kind that follows a decision neither of them could take back. The land around the cabin smelled of gunpowder and disturbed earth. The makeshift graves behind the ridge were shallow, but marked with stones. Brant had done that out of habit, not respect. Inside the cabin, Naya folded the blanket, smoothed it out with deliberate movements, then knelt by the hearth where the fire had gone out some time before dawn. Her fingers moved with purpose as she laid new kindling, struck the flint, and coaxed a flame back to life. Her face showed no sign of fear or regret, only focus. Brant sat by the table, sleeves rolled up, a line of dried blood across one forearm from carrying the wounded tracker. That man hadn't survived the night. Loss of blood and infection had finished him quietly sometime in the dark. Brant had dragged the body out before Naya woke and added him to the ridge. There was no discussion about it. As she added a tin of beans to the pot, Naya finally broke the silence. "Do you think they were the last?" Brant looked over, voice low. "No." She nodded once. "Then we need to be ready." "You already were." Naya didn't smile at that. She stirred the pot without looking up. "If more come, it won't be 4. It'll be 10, maybe more. If someone paid them once, someone can pay others." Brant stood and crossed the floor, his boots making dull thuds against the planks. He leaned against the beam near the window, eyes on the hills. "I've been thinking about that." "About what?" "Running. Leaving the cabin. Moving farther west. Maybe to the border. You think that solves this?" "I think it gives us time." Naya turned to him now. "What if I don't want to run?" He watched her carefully. "Then we don't. But you'd go if it was just you." "I was always ready to keep moving. Staying, that's newer for me." Naya stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "Then why haven't you left?" Brant met her gaze, voice quiet. "Because every time I've stayed somewhere before, I did it for the wrong reason. This time, maybe it's the right one." She didn't touch him. Not yet. But her body softened, the distance between them no longer filled with mistrust. She turned back to the fire, stirring the pot again. After they ate, they set about reinforcing the cabin. Brant repaired the west shutter, replaced 2 rotten boards along the front porch, and filled the water tank with runoff he'd collected in a side barrel. Naya sharpened both rifles, checked ammunition, and then retrieved her small blade from under the hearth where she'd hidden it that first night. She wore it now in a sheath on her hip. By mid-afternoon, they rested under the awning outside the front door. The sky had cleared fully, no clouds, no wind, just still heat pressing down from above. Naya leaned back on her elbows, her legs stretched out before her, bare feet crossed at the ankles. Brant sat in the chair beside her, his hat pulled down low, eyes half closed. "You never said what you did before the war," she said. "I ran cattle. My father had a spread near the Verde River. Lost it in a flood. Then I scouted for the army." "You lose people?" He hesitated. "A brother. My wife. Unborn son. Ow!" "Bandits crossed the land while I was gone. I came back to find the place burned." She didn't answer right away. "And you blame yourself." He nodded once. Naya turned her head. "I lost a sister. She was 12. We were gathering root near the canyon. Soldiers came fast. Took her, left me. You tried to stop them?" She looked him in the eye. "I stabbed one. He shot me in the leg. I ran anyway." Brant's eyes dropped to her thigh. She tapped it once with her palm. "Scar's still there. You ever find her?" She shook her head. "She's not alive." He didn't offer comfort, just sat beside her in silence. Later, while the heat still pressed, Naya went to wash at the tank. Brant gave her space, stayed inside, and cleaned the rifles again, every part taken apart and checked twice. When she came back, her hair was wet, pulled into a loose braid over one shoulder. Her dress was darker from dampness, clinging again to her skin, the repaired seams holding well. Her cleavage was more exposed than she likely intended, but she didn't adjust it. She caught Brant watching, and for once, she didn't look away. Instead, she stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "I'm not weak anymore," she said. "I never said you were. You treated me like I was made of glass when I collapsed. But I'm still here." Brant stood slowly. "That's because you're stronger than most." She stepped closer. "Then treat me like I am." He didn't reach for her at first. He waited. Let her choose. She did. Her hand slid along the side of his face, fingers grazing the scar beneath his eye. He closed his eyes briefly, jaw tightening. She spoke quietly. "If I stay, it's because I choose it, not because I owe you anything. I wouldn't want it otherwise." They stood there for a long moment before their bodies closed the gap. When they kissed this time, it was fuller, deeper, not tentative. Her hands pulled him closer, his grip the small of her back. She pressed her forehead against his chest, breath shaking. "I don't want to be owned," she whispered again. "You won't be. I don't want to be pitted." "You're not. Then I want to be wanted." "You are." He guided her to the cot. Not rushed, not forceful. His hands found her waist, then slid beneath the strap of her dress. She stopped him. "Not to prove anything," she said. "No," he agreed. "Only if you want it." She nodded. They undressed slowly, clothes pushed aside rather than torn. Her skin was warm from the sun, still scented with sage and dust. His chest bore the marks of old wounds, some healed, some not. She touched each one, not asking how they came to be. They made love that afternoon in silence. No words, no promises, just the steady connection of two people no longer drifting. When it was done, they lay tangled together, breath slow, arms wrapped around one another without tension. Brant's hand rested against her hip, hers against his chest. Outside, the wind picked up again, but this time it didn't bring threat. Only the sound of something settling. A stillness earned. A place chosen. The sun rose without fanfare, just a gradual fading of darkness over the canyon ridge. Brant was already outside, splitting dry wood with slow, steady strikes. Each swing was precise, the kind of movement that came not from urgency, but from someone used to surviving by rhythm. The axe split the logs cleanly, the echo of each hit bouncing off the stone walls behind the cabin. Inside, Naya moved with equal purpose. She swept the floor, wiped down the small table, and folded the blankets tight along the edge of the cot. She had redressed in the same deerskin garment, now fully repaired, her braid tighter, her presence more grounded. Her knife sat sheathed against her hip, her rifle within arm's reach. She wasn't preparing to run. She was preparing to live. They hadn't spoken much that morning, but nothing had felt distant. It wasn't silence out of uncertainty, it was understanding. A different kind of language had taken root between them. Brant entered with an armful of kindling, placing it in the corner by the hearth. He dusted off his hands, then glanced toward the ridge. "We'll need to scout the south trail today. If there's any fresh movement, I want to see it before it sees us." Naya nodded. "I'll come." "You sure? I'm not staying behind again." Brant didn't argue. He handed her one of the rifles, and they stepped out into the dry light, boots crunching on the gravel as they descended toward the lower trail. The landscape had changed subtly over the past few days. Wind had shifted new lines in the sand. Vultures circled farther west, too distant to mean anything certain, but enough to make Brant keep his hand close to his belt. They moved single file for a while, Naya watching the higher ground, Brant watching the dust for tracks. At a narrow bend in the canyon wall, he stopped suddenly and crouched. She followed. "What is it?" "Hoof print," he said, brushing his fingers over the edge of an indentation. "About a day old. Ryder was moving fast. Alone. Returning. Could be. Or scouting." They scanned the area. No signs of camp. No ashes. No fresh droppings. Whoever passed through hadn't stopped. Naya exhaled slowly. "Then they didn't find the bodies." "No," Brant said. "But they're looking for them." They returned to the cabin just before midday, having looped a wide arc that took them across 2 hills and back behind the North Bluff. No new prints, no smoke, no movement. Still, the tension hadn't lifted. Back at the cabin, Brant checked the fencing while Naya fetched water. The routine grounded them, but both felt the weight of uncertainty. It had been quiet too long, not the kind of peace that settles in for good, just the kind that comes before something breaks. That evening, after supper, Brant stepped outside and sat on the porch beam. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows down the slope. Naya joined him, her shoulder brushing his as she sat beside him. "You ever think about rebuilding it?" she asked. "The ranch, this cabin, the land. Living here, not just surviving it." He considered it for a moment. "Thought about it last night." She looked over. "What changed?" "You," he said, "waking up beside you. Hearing you breathe, not just survive. That changed something." She didn't smile, but her voice softened. "I don't want to leave." "Then we don't." Naya leaned into him, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. "We should bury the past somewhere," she said. "Not forget it. Just stop living in it." Brant placed his hand gently over hers. "We can't erase what happened, but maybe we can make something from what's left." That night, they shared the cot without hesitation. No tension, no questions. Their bodies found each other easily, her hands resting against the curve of his jaw, his fingers tracing the line of her back where old scars had begun to fade. They didn't make promises. They didn't have to. At dawn, Brant stood by the window with a tin cup of coffee in his hand, watching the ridge line with a stillness that had nothing to do with fear. Naya wrapped the blanket around herself, stepped up behind him, and rested her chin between his shoulder blades. "You see anything?" she murmured. "No. Good." He turned toward her, placed the cup aside, and reached for her waist. She let the blanket fall to the floor and stepped into his arms, her body warm from sleep, her breath steady. "Where are we now?" she asked. He brushed his fingers down her arm. "Two people who stayed when we didn't have to." She pressed her forehead to his. "Then let's build something no one can tear down." They spent the next days cutting new planks for the cabin's outer wall, repairing the roof slats, clearing brush from the rear path to make it harder for anyone to circle unseen. They dug a new storage pit behind the barn foundation and reinforced the cellar door with iron nails Brant had stashed years ago and used until now. By the end of the week, the place no longer looked temporary. It looked like it had been claimed. One morning, while Brant hammered the final nail into the west shutter, Naya came out holding a bundle wrapped in linen. Inside was a set of handmade beaded cords, feathers woven into the leather, part of a ceremonial piece from her tribe. "I kept these," she said, "not because of what they meant before, but because I wanted to give them to someone when I was free." She tied one around his wrist. Brant didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. That night, under a sky as wide and still as the day he'd first found her, they stood side by side, arms linked, rifles leaning against the porch post, the wind moving just enough to cool the sweat from their skin. They weren't running. They weren't hiding. And for the first time in years, neither of them felt like ghosts. They had chosen to stay, and nothing would take that from them.